Yes.
Okay.
We're live.
Awesome. Okay, so we're going to have Laura and Natalie talk about their cognitive domain intervention assignment from lesson 10 and 11, and then Connie, Jillian, and myself, Jordan, will talk about ours.
Laura and I worked on a PowerPoint that was an intervention guide for teachers for children of mentally ill parents. We focus on the age range of 6 to 11. I'm going to state 3 facts that we learned about the children who have mentally ill parents. When we first started out, we got some great basic ideas from the reading that we had done. Then once we had started to research on our own, we found that children that have mentally ill parents have the odds against them. We found out that more than 5 million children in the United States alone have a parent with a severe mental illness. Severe mental illness includes bipolar disorder, major depression, and schizophrenia. The more we researched, the more we thought about these 5 million kids and just wanted to reach out and help them. Not only did the 5 million children affected leave us baffled, it led us to another fact that 70 to 80% of parents with a severe mental illness will lose custody of their child. The last fact that I'm going to share with you today came from the study done in Taiwan. The study found that during the preschool years, 54 deaths were documented among offspring of parents with severe mental illness, and 155 in the comparison cohort. Parental mental illness was independently associated with a risk of death nearly 2.4 times higher than in the comparison cohort.
Thank you, Natalie. And that's one reason why we chose to focus on the aspect of the physical domain. Obviously, there are going to be some emotional and cognitive deficits that these children will experience, but we were really staggered by some of those statistics that affect these children physically. I'm going to cover briefly the microsystems that are affecting these children. A child of a parent with mental illness has a microsystem of both their home where they live with a mentally ill parent, as well as the school where they have a teacher who could implement interventions that reduce the risks for this child. In the home and at school, the child will need social and physical supports if they hope to cope with the effects of their parent's illness. So the mesosystem for a child of mentally ill parents is the connection between their home and school. Some interventions that we came up with that teachers could use to help these children include providing resources such as referrals to a school counselor, a listening ear, encouraging words, and referrals to welfare agencies that can intervene and provide the child with adequate food and clothing if it's lacking. Also, if a teacher notices signs of physical abuse or neglect, which tends to be high among these children, they are obligated by law to report such suspected abuse so the child can receive the protection they need. Some of the challenges then that we found to a teacher implementing some of these interventions include children being removed from their homes, which then would also remove the child from the teacher's supervision or care. They typically, if they're removed from a home, they're changing schools, and that teacher will never see that child again. Another challenge that we found with this intervention is dealing with upset or offended hostile parents. So the solution for the first challenge we found was just having that teacher focus on doing everything they can for that child while that child is with them, because they may not be able to control if that child is removed from the home and from their classroom. Dealing with upset and offended parents, we found some strategies. They could document the child's problem behavior and their conversations that the teacher had about it. That teachers need to be careful to not talk to a parent or write to them when they are angry. And also to talk to other teachers who work with the child so that that teacher feels like they have a little more backup in things. Also, they could use active or reflective listening when conversing with parents. They need to be careful when talking to parents to describe the problem in behavioral, non-judgmental terms, and then agree on specific steps that the parent and the teacher will be taking together to help that child.
To sum up our presentation, we would like to end with the fact that motivated us to do this presentation. Teachers know that when one person in the family experiences difficulties, everyone is affected. Young family members often take on adult responsibilities and experience uncertainty, anger, shame, sadness, and fear, confused by the parental unavailability. Children often feel uncared for, unloved, left out, and lonely. In the physical domain, parental mental illness has staggering consequences on children. But with the help of caring, sensitive, intuitive teachers, the outcomes for these children can be improved.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you both very much. At this time, I think Tommy, Jillian, and myself would like to talk about our project. We did a PowerPoint about for a teacher's guide to identify and intervene with neglected students, specifically focusing on the physical domain for children between the ages of 6 and 11. Connie, would you like to talk about Danielle?
Yeah, okay. I'll talk about Danielle, and then we can talk about the different interventions we came up with, and also some opposition we might face with this, with neglect. So Danielle was discovered in 2005 in a home that was infested with bugs, and she was 7 years old. She was not potty trained. She was wearing nothing but a diaper. Her body was covered with bug bites. Her hair was matted. She not only was she physically not taken care of, but cognitively as well. And although we're focusing on the physical domain, we know that neglect does affect cognitive domain of children too. She couldn't drink from a cup. She could only drink from a bottle. She couldn't speak. She could kind of grunt. She couldn't chew or swallow any solid food. She'd never been to school or a doctor. She didn't know how to hold a doll or play peekaboo. And because she was severely neglected, she was going to be disabled for the rest of her life. She couldn't even do physical activities like making eye contact. She felt no pain. She couldn't react to hot or cold. And when she was given an IV needle, she didn't react at all. So we decided to focus on the physical domain because it was really interesting to us to know that severe neglect of children could have a huge impact on their motor skills and other things that relate to the physical domain.
Another part of the physical domain was television for kids 6 to 11, and the physical abilities that they hinders them to perform in school. Some of the things that we came up with were like weight gain, because they just sit around. They don't really have any PE, at home per se. They don't really write a ton. They're just sitting there watching TV. They don't eat very good. Their nutrition not very good. Some other things that we thought of for teachers to use would be to send a survey home about their television watching habits. Some other things were to talk to parents, send home a physical activity log to have the parents log the kids' physical activity. Some more things were their dental needs. They have bad hygiene. They're under or overweight. They don't receive the physical problems like medically. Their clothes don't fit them. They're absent or late for school because their parents don't really care that much. They're delayed in, other physical needs. They are more susceptible to get hurt, and they fall asleep in class. Their families don't really care.
Right, so those are some of the signs that we saw that teachers can use. Some other additional signs are that students may have many pets and describe them as hungry or dying, which is a less embarrassing way to kind of let the teacher know that's the situation that they're in. And they also exhibit self-soothing behaviors such as thumb sucking and rocking. They may have displays and physical development, and these students may be seen playing in unsafe environments or with unsafe people. So there are many, many ways that teachers can detect signs of neglect. Some of the interventions that we saw that we thought of was to go to the parents and caretakers with your concerns in a kind manner, and to address all potential cases of neglect, because extreme cases are usually addressed very quickly, but it's the less severe, yet more chronic cases that are often overlooked, sadly. We also thought that teachers could use the intervention of making referrals to community resources, such as Parents Anonymous, mental health centers, and that they should also report all cases of suspected child neglect. Connie, do you want to wrap up with
Yeah.
the
So
ecological theory?
So we also discussed some of the challenges that we could face, and a lot of these were the same as Natalie and Laura's presentation that they did. We identified parental opposition as one of our main challenges that teachers may face in trying to apply this knowledge, and that parents might deny that their children are neglected. They may become defensive, and that in order for children to overcome this, they need parental support, but they're not going to get it. So it kind of puts teachers in a hard position. But they can work with the parents. I agree with what Natalie and Laura said about working with the parents and trying to come up with common goals that can help the child. So we thought that could be overcome by good communication with the parents, and also seeking, like Jordan said, seeking external resources for the child. And then the other another challenge we came up with was a lack of resources. That some families, some children are neglected just because families don't have the means to provide for them. They don't have the warm clothing or food that the children need. So when families need additional temporal support, they can draw on the mesosystem, which we talked about in the ecological theory, which links school, home, family, and community all together. So teachers can provide information to parents about food banks, clothing drives, charity groups that can help them, and they can encourage parents to seek temporal help from their communities or church groups that are around.
Thank you, everyone. Now we're going to individually go through and talk about the social emotional domain intervention that we researched this week. And we'll talk about whether we have actually had the opportunity to implement these interventions personally. And we will also individually talk about the highlights from the domain interviews that we conducted during this lesson.
Okay. For my social emotional domain intervention, I researched negative friendships. Negative friends can lead to poor self-esteem, getting into trouble, bullying, negative behavior, and confused standards. My nephew, who is 6-year-old, has already come into contact with negative friendships. Although I have not implemented the interventions personally, my sister has started the process of things that I found. I found in my research that parents often question whether they should intervene or not when a negative friendship is happening in their child's life. In Good Housekeeping magazine, there was an article, When Bad Friends Happen to Good Kids, and I found that phasing out bad friends in your child's life is something that as parents we must do. It is suggested in the article. So what do you do if a bad seed suddenly goes into heavy rotation among your little darling's pal? Fortunately, most kids under 12 can be brought into line. They go on, they continue. If a friend comes over and behaves badly, you have to intervene. Then have a talk with your child about him or her. Parents often make the mistake of accommodating a friend's bad conduct for fear of hurting their child socially, but they can be a tactic endorsement. Think about it this way. Kids count on their parents to have high standards for their friendships. Any child under 12 is not old enough to make these decisions solo. I have often heard the phrase, I am your parent and not your friend. But in situations like this, I think that most parents do not intervene when it is most important that they do. I read that in the 6 to 11-year-old stage of childhood, that you need to watch out for fame seekers who are just looking to be popular, who will take any sacrifice that they need to be as popular as they can. That's extremely negative on friendship because they will tell secrets, they will hurt you, and they will just not back down because they want to be as popular as possible. From the blog, What to Expect, from the creators of What to Expect, also explores What to Expect When You're Expecting, also explores negative friendships. They suggest that parents host as much as they can with playdates. This way you can set house rules and hear and see everything that happens during the playdate. If the negative behavior continues, they suggest going to the teacher and asking for help. They may know of a way to connect with the child who is having a negative influence that can help deviate the negative behavior. But ultimately, if it continues, start to phase out that friend who has a negative impact. Also, all the research that you can find about having negative friendships is that parents need to know who your child's friends are. When we know who our children are hanging out with, they're less likely to hang out with bad seeds in front of us, and then they will start to phase out themselves. Some of the highlights from the domain interviews that I conducted, was one thing that really stuck out to me about the social emotional domain. When I interviewed the two teachers, one said a child who is bullied and a child who is a bully. And on my notes I just put bullying, and she had saw what I had written, and she said, that's not enough. Bullying is not enough. You need to separate that into the two different categories. She said that we must understand that these are two different types of kids, and they are to be dealt with separately. So when I started to conduct more interviews, to ask more questions about that, a lot of schools treat those students differently, who bully and who are bullied, and a lot of times the parents are ones that reflect it. So that's why she said that that it's important to have them separated, because you are dealing with something completely different. In the cognitive section, growth mindset was a topic that we talked about for a long time. It is really important for children to have a growth mindset, to know that they can achieve things and they are not everything that they hear. When kids have a fixed mindset, they often hear, you will never learn how to do this, or you will never be smart enough to understand that. As parents and as educators, we need to make sure that we are promoting growth mindset to our children, because it will lead them to think that they can achieve the unthinkable, which will lead them to explore, grow, and learn in ways they wouldn't have been able to if they had a fixed mindset. In the physical domain, a big topic was abuse, and something interesting that they told me to look out for was clothing. If they're wearing like a long sleeve shirt in the summertime, they might be trying to hide something. And they might not know what they're doing, but the mom might, or the parents might make them wear that, and they just don't ever want to question it. So they said to make sure with abuse in young children, just to look at their clothing, because that could be a big keeper. Done.
All right. Thank you, Natalie. So for me, what I researched this week was the topic of bullying, and Natalie touched on it as far as her parent interviews went, and I think it's a really common problem that people face. The reason I chose this topic was because my son was bullied when he was in 6th grade, and it took me over a month. We were into October before he would open up and talk to me about what was happening, and I really had to push him to give me some of those details. I just had this sense and this overwhelming feeling that something was off and something wasn't right. And so finally, after some gentle probing and not giving up, when he'd say, everything's fine, everything's okay, and I just kept asking the same question in different ways, he finally admitted that this student would twist his arm and laugh. He would break his pencils. He would make my son help him with his homework or threaten to hurt my son if he didn't. And then he made it all seem like a game and that it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal, and it was really upsetting to my son. And when he was finally able to get all that out, I had him write everything down, and then I immediately called the school and told them what was happening with my son. And so I focused part of this on teachers and what teachers can do to help with bullying. And so I'm going to talk about some of those interventions in a minute. So those were some of the interventions that I did as a parent, and then I continued to check in with him periodically, any issues, as time went on, to make sure that it wasn't still happening, that it truly had ended, as the assistant principal was assuring our family. There is a difference between bullying and teasing, and it's important to note the difference. Teasing is sporadic, it's non-threatening, and it's generally unintentional. It might hurt someone's feelings, but it's not persistent. Bullying is intentional, it's threatening, and it's persistent attacks against another person to intimidate them or bring them emotional harm. Bullying can be direct through verbal or physical attacks in the presence of the victim, or it can be indirect through verbal attacks via the internet or spreading rumors. And I did a lot of this research on stopbullying.gov, and they said that bullying is not a one-time physical fight, an online argument, or incidents between adults. People who bully are usually insecure themselves and seek to elevate their self-worth by putting others down. So teachers, as I mentioned before, are especially important when it comes to eradicating bullying in their classrooms. Teachervision.com was another website that I researched that is dedicated to helping teachers be successful in many areas and included several links for dealing with bullying. One article was called Bully Proof Your Classroom. And I really liked this article because it gave many helpful intervention tips aimed at not only putting a stop to bullying, but at preventing it from starting in the first place. So one of the things they talked about was playing get-to-know-you games at the start of the year. And that helps children develop empathy for each other, which is a natural deterrent to bullying. And they reasoned that when you feel empathy to another person, it's difficult to objectify them. And that's what bullies do. They objectify their victims. Also, they said that teachers should teach children how to handle minor teasing on their own and empower them to deal with normal peer conflicts. They recommended opening lines of communication by having regular class meetings where children are encouraged to report issues in a safe and supportive atmosphere. Students add to the agenda throughout the week as issues arise, and then when the day of the class meeting arrives, students are able to review the incidents as a class and discuss solutions together, and this discourages occasional bullying. Then also there needs to be a way for children to speak to teachers privately. Not everything may be appropriate to report in a group setting. And then they recommended establishing a zero tolerance policy, and thankfully my son's school did have this. As soon as I called, the assistant principal took the name, took the notes, I faxed him that page that my son had written down of everything that had happened. He called the family, he brought them in. It wasn't just the kid bringing them into the office, and there were no issues after that. And I was really grateful because I know that's not the case for many kids that are bullied. But dealing with hurtful behaviors immediately and having clear-cut consequences for those who violate class rules or policies can help minimize or eliminate bullying. So when I did my parent interviews, that was my research for this week. When I did my parent interviews, I interviewed a mother who has 3 kids, and she's also has an education in early childhood education, and then a school teacher, and she works at my kids' schools teaching first grade. And for physical, for the mother, she focused more on the 2 to 5 year range, and the teacher, our conversation was focused more on the 6 to 11-year-old range. And so for the 2 to 5 year range, she identified the physical risks and problems. Potty training is one, and then climbing, exploring, they're able to be out there in the big world, but it's still really big for them. They have a huge backyard, and she still has to go out with her 4-year-old and just make sure that she's safe in that big backyard. They just need continued monitoring. For the cognitive of 2 to 5 years, she said that language development can be a real issue. And she recommended that some of the interventions for that would be to read to them and to talk with them, to interact and communicate with them, and obviously get them any outside intervention, like early intervention for that language development if they need it. And then in the social emotional area, she said that this is the age when they're very egocentric. They're into the me stage. They want independence, but they still need help, and that's really hard and frustrating for them. And I liked her suggestions for interventions for that. She said that when you need to give them options and choices so they feel like they have some control and they feel like, you know, they're not constantly being told what to do. And so a lot of times it works to just give them two choices so that you still have control over what's happening, but they feel like they have a say in what's going on so that both of you can be happy. With my teacher, she had a different perspective for these 6 to 11-year-olds. She talked about the fact that now they're older, they take greater physical risks. They still can't understand what happened, so there's kind of a lot of injuries out on the playground. And also she said they tend to get sick more because now they're at school. And she said, even myself as a parent, I monitor my younger child, she's 4, her hand washing and all of that much more than I do my 3rd grader. And so she's said that parents really need to continue to monitor, and schools need to have you know, safe rules and things to help keep kids safe on the playgrounds and enforce those rules. But she also said don't interfere too much, because if you do that, then it prevents them from learning by experience. So there, you walk that fine line, and you need to be careful in that way. Cognitively, she said that the expectations for these kids is immense. She said that they are expected to know so much, and what she really wants is she just wants a 6-year-old to be able to perform like a 6-year-old. She said for interventions for that, to give them extra, lots of tender, loving care. She said when she was teaching them a unit, these 5 and 6-year-olds, they went through this unit for 5 weeks, and they seemed so engaged during the whole time, and that by the time they got to the end of the unit, they just could not remember it all. She says they have way high expectations, so parents can be really supportive and keep their expectations realistic. And then in the social and emotional domain, she said that because they're so trusting, they're at very high risk for sexual abuse. She also mentioned that school age, you know, peers can be a real problem, and that kind of touches on what Natalie said about the negative friendships and also bullying. And so she again mentioned for interventions for that to teach problem-solving skills and coping skills, and to help kids work out some of their social issues and working with them. And that's what I had for my 2 interviews.
All right, so the risk I chose to delve into in regards to the social emotional domain of development is neglect. This is a risk because it can have severe, damaging short and long-term effects on children's social and emotional development, and this is especially apparent when neglect occurs early in the child's life. Neglected children socially withdraw and have limited peer interactions, and internalize their problems versus externalizing them, as is most normal for children. So neglect is the most common form of child abuse. It is defined as a caregiver-child relationship that is characterized by patterns of harmful yet not physical interactions. Time-limited trials of interventions are beneficial to youth in cases of neglect. There are many interventions that are beneficial to implement in combating the risk of neglect. Teachers, extended family, friends, and other outside of home sources can provide neglected children with love and attention. Neglected children can also get involved in after-school activities. School counselors can provide emotional support to neglected children as well. And neglectful parents can be led to resources that help them understand how neglect works, how they might be neglecting their children, and how to become more involved and loving in their parental ways. The 2 articles that I found much of this information from, one is called Emotional Abuse and Neglect by Glazer, and the other one is called Child Neglect Development Issues and Outcomes. The reason why I chose this risk is not because we talked about it last week in the physical domain. It's actually because my nephew that lives just a few miles away is currently suffering very severely from neglect, and I can see the social emotional proof of that. Just for a little bit of background, he's 4 years old, and his mom has been in and out of jail the past 6 months. But even 6 months before then, she has just not really been involved, just making bad choices instead. So in their home, just some signs of neglect that initially caught my attention were poop on the wall, under the bed, and also him acting out. So the interventions that I have had the privilege of implementing to try and help combat this risk is being an outside of the home source that has provided him with love and attention. I often go over to, they think it's babysitting, but it's more than that. I just want to make sure that he does feel like he exists and that he's loved and his voice matters. And I've seen that this has emotionally helped him at least a little bit, and this has been a very good experience to implement what we're learning about. I conducted 2 informal interviews that focused on children in the age range of 6 to 11 years old. The first interview was with my sister-in-law, who is a mother of an 8-year-old, and the second took place with my friend, who is a mother to a newborn. So for the physical domain, some of the risks that they came up with were obesity, disease, poverty, developmental disabilities, and bullying. And the interventions that we came up for obesity is just for families to cook together healthy meals and to also do physical activities as a family. And this can help the children not feel so singled out and also give them the support that they need. For disease, the interventions that we were talking about was having the family keep up on shots and vaccinations and making sure that, like Laura was saying, that they're washing their hands and just normal hygiene practices like that. With poverty, we kind of talked about how the government can help if parents can't get a job and more financial assistance through means outside of governmental help. And also how schools, oftentimes, they have programs where if children are impoverished, they can come early to school for a free breakfast and things like that. And then for developmental disabilities, we talked about parents getting children involved in support groups, and for the schools to provide these children with specialized education so that they still get a wonderful education and great school experience. And then for bullying, which has been talked about with Laura and Natalie, we talked about how schools can provide education on bullying, how to defend against it, and parents can also educate. They can watch for bullying. They can try and talk about it with their children and help them know that it's safe to discuss with them. And then let's see. Okay, and then in the social emotional domain, I talked about, well, we talked about neglect with my interviewees, bullying, again, self-esteem issues, familial relationship issues, and harmful media. I'm just going to go ahead and skip neglect and bullying since we talked about that in the physical domain already for my interviews. But with self-esteem issues, some interventions that we discussed were counselors helping children use cognitive behavioral therapy to attain a better self-image and to be able to control their thoughts a little bit better. We also thought that loved ones can be notified of this from parents or teachers, and that they can build these kids up. We talked about how at school there are campaigns, and even in the media there are campaigns that encourage better self-esteem. And it was really neat. We talked about how the gospel and the atonement can help with self-esteem issues as well. And then I'll just wrap up with familial issues. The intervention that we came up with was working as a family, even though the family is the issue, but that really the family is the one that will benefit the most if they work on it versus having someone else figure out how to deal with it for them. And that this can be done through therapists and bishops and community and extended family. So that's the information that I learned this week, and that is the information from my 2 interviews.
Thank you. That was great. So I did mine on parents that don't give their kids enough time and attention. And some of the things one thing, I didn't implement the interventions necessarily with like another child or anything, but some of the things that I learned was to play with your child, to be able to bond with them while they're still in the womb. Like so many times the moms and dads can talk to their kids when they're still in the womb. That is a form of bonding. To just engage with their child. And 2, one of the things that there was this article that I read that was about fathers, how they don't feel connected to their child. And just to spend, quality time and quantity time, they're 2 different things, and you need to have them be the same. Have them be the same amount of time. The quantity and the quality is, you need to have the quality of time versus in the quantity of time. And it said too, parenting is your wife's responsibility, but it's yours as a father as well. And sometimes a father feels rejected when the child wants to go to their mom rather than their dad. I can kind of see that if they're around their mom most of the day because the dad's at work. Fathers tend to feel more comfortable with their sons than with their daughters, and I'm sure that's vice versa with the moms and the daughters versus the moms and the sons. There's just that bond, especially when your child is little, they're going to want the mom versus the dad because they have that special connection because they're inside of you, I think. But as I grow older, I can see that fathers feel more comfortable with their sons than their daughters. And then another article, working mothers spend less time with their kids than stay-at-home mothers. And just one thing that they said was spending more time with the teen when they're teenagers because they're less delinquent, they won't get into as much illegal or risky behavior. They said too, you need to be with your children when they're teens because the repercussions of that come long before they're even teenagers. You need to spend that time when they're young, because to foster the closeness and the trust between you and your child. Even 6 hours a week, they actually did this study and they said 6 hours a week was positive, time together versus less than that. This one mom said she quit her job to stay on with her children because childcare is getting expensive and the finances were hard to handle. If you have to do that, then that's great. If you can't, then that's okay. But the amount of time, they said the amount of time doesn't matter so much as the little pieces that you put together as your time moves on. And then it talked about smartphones, how parents are on their smartphones multitasking, just swinging their child at the same time as they're sending a text message or talking on the phone at the same time they're trying to, do something with their child. I mean, I think this day and age, we're multitasking a lot more, especially with our phones and our kids and other things around the house. And the kids can see us doing that, and I would just wonder what they think. Like, what are you doing? Like when they're 2 or 3 or 4. Are smartphones really making us smart as parents or less smart? I think we have to think about that. The American Academy of Pediatrics said to limit the time, like for instance, if you're going to have your child watch a television show, say, I need to write this email for 5 minutes and send it, and then I'll put my phone down, and when I'm done, I'll spend time with you. Tell the child up front what you're going to do, and then do it, but then come right back to your child and spend that time with them. And another thing that they said is you can get back to technology later, like that'll always be there, but you can't get back to your kids because they keep growing up and they keep changing, and you're not going to have that time to get back with them. You're going to lose that time versus technology you can always get back to later, but the time with your kids are precious and you're not going to be able to get that time back. There was an article that I read a couple of years ago. I think it was on Facebook or something, and it was this couple. They were both born in like 1986, and this couple decided to take their TV, their computer, all their electronics, their cell phones, turn them off for a year. They got a landline put in. They lived like they were in 1986 or 1987. And they did that for a year, and they went outside and played with their kids. They didn't have iPads, computers, phones, any of that stuff that we have nowadays. And they did it just for a year. Their neighbors and parents probably thought they were crazy getting a landline put in and other things. But it really helped them to see that there's more to just the technology we have. We can shut it off. We can go play with our kids outside, go, do that one-on-one time, play board games together, have these times that we can be with our kids more. So that's what I got for the social part. And then for the interview, let me grab it. Okay. I interviewed my visiting teacher who has a 2-year-old and a almost 5-year-old at the time. Some of the things that she said was for the physical is the kids are fearless. They're not cautious and they can hurt themselves. They don't quite understand, they'll just jump off a couch and land on the floor or, whatever without really seeing what they're getting into. And some of the things with that, some of the strengths with that was we can teach our children the dangers, such as there's a stove and that's hot, or there's a fire, it's hot, don't touch it. And to talk and repeat it to the child, that is good as well, just to keep repeating what you're, so they get it. And then teaching your friends and siblings and parents about, helping the child to not hurt themselves as much. And a cognitive thing was too much television and screen time, to watch and monitor the child, that they won't do it so much, put timers on it. And too much TV time, kids won't listen. I see that with my own daughter. I'm sure we're all guilty of having too much TV time with our kids, especially when we're at school. Just to limit screen time and have more outside interaction with the kids. Use a timer, and warn the other mothers about the hazards of screen time that can affect the kids. And then for the social and emotional, not learning how to socialize with other kids, not having human contact, since I talked about this screen time thing, it kind of goes along with that. And another thing for cognitive was preschools have many different ways of learning, having children learn math and reading and, whatever else. and it's the kid's own, how the kid learns might be better than what the different ways that there are. Different kids can learn different ways of learning something. There's not one way to learn something. Parents don't give their kids enough time to have that one-on-one time, and go outside and have play dates and interact with kids. That's important. And let's see, just have parents be the guidance for the kids. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Jolene. Everyone's had some really interesting things to talk about so far. So this week I focused on overprotective parents, and I read two interesting articles. One was called Overprotective Parenting, and it focused on social anxiety and how that can sometimes be a result from overprotective parenting. It talked about that, let me see, that there were significant positive relationships between social anxiety and maternal overprotection and paternal overprotection. So they did a study with college students in their first semester of college, and whether they came from a relationship that was overprotective with their mother or with their father, and how that resulted in their level of social anxiety with that big milestone. So they found that relationships with overprotective mothers had a greater impact on social anxiety than paternal overprotective relationships. They also noticed that overprotective parenting contributes to the development of a cognitive style in which an individual believes that outcomes are largely determined by external factors. So these kids develop social anxiety because they feel like they don't have any control over their lives, basically because their lives have been lived for them by their overprotective parents, and they've never had any control over any of their decisions. So it kind of debilitates them, and then the parents send them off into these experiences where they're expected to make choices where they've never had to make choices before. So that was a really interesting study. Also, it was interesting to me to find out that the mother's relationship with the child had more of an impact than the father's relationship. Then the next article I read was geared more towards young kids and what we can do right now to make sure that we're not stifling them and giving them enough autonomy to make decisions. And that was called Are You Fighting Your Kids' Battles? And it was from Good Housekeeping magazine. And it talked about that kids are resourceful, and we don't give them enough credit to make their own decisions and to develop basic skills and resolve their problems. One of the interventions that they suggested was to never go to the teacher or principal without talking to your child first, and to make sure that you communicate with your child and have a good, open relationship with them where they feel comfortable and where they can feel secure with you and come and tell you what's going on with them, which isn't always easy to do, but I thought that was a really good intervention, because if you go to the teacher or principal before speaking with your child, there could be some miscommunication going on. One of the things that they pointed out in this magazine that could go on is that the child might not agree with your actions or with what you plan to do with that. So since the child is the one who has to live with the consequences of the actions, your actions, by talking to the teacher, it's best to just talk to the child first and make sure that you are actually being an advocate for your child and not just advocating for your own agenda. This was a really great intervention. It suggested to step back and ask yourself, who's more upset about this situation, me or my child? So again, making sure that the child, doing what the child actually needs versus what we just, are up in arms about. It suggested giving the child a small boost. They said it's okay to bring up problems if you need to. It's okay to advocate for your child, but you just need to make sure that you're on the same page. When children can't deal with a problem on their own, such as some of the things we've discussed, like bullying, It's definitely okay to step in, but do not be adversarial, because other parents or teachers will become defensive. So to be very matter of fact and try to be proactive in fixing the problem, and also always fostering open, good communication. And then I loved this last one. It said to brainstorm with kids before problems happen again or at all. So that's one of the things that I actually have implemented, and I feel does work with my own children. We like to talk about potential problems or problems that they have had and role play. And it may seem a little juvenile, but my kids are in the age range of 8 to 10. So it works for us, and they think it's fun, and it's also an education for them, because it helps kids when they're actually in those scenarios how to deal with them, because they've practiced before. So I have implemented that. I feel like that works. I feel like it kind of empowers the kids so that they feel like they do have control over their lives. They do have control if a bad situation comes about. So that's what I got from my articles this week. I really liked them. Highlights from my interviews, like everyone else, I had a lot of similar ones as everyone else. So physical, first of all, I interviewed my husband and my sister, and we have a 3-year-old, and so I asked my husband to focus on her, and my sister has a 4-year-old, and so I asked her to focus on him. And there were a lot of interesting things. I don't want to repeat everything that's been said, but my husband said one physical risk for kids that age is sexual abuse. And one of the biggest problems with that is that they can't always communicate. They can't always tell somebody what's going on, and they're at risk because they really basically have no control. They're at the mercy of adults around them. Another thing is to notice physical development and maybe how their body is growing, just making sure that everything is working properly. For example, my daughter has a little dimple at the base of her spine, and she would never obviously be able to see that or recognize that that's there, but we've been speaking with the pediatrician, and it could be a tethered spinal cord, which if it is, we need to get that fixed so that it doesn't inhibit her walking later on in life at like 8 to 10 years old. But that's something that children would have no idea about. So, and then as far as cognitive, again, same with Jillian and a lot of others, too much screen time. One thing my sister mentioned was living in a dangerous part of town with no yard. That could really inhibit a child's ability to have imagination, play, and pretend play. Also, language barriers. If you're an immigrant, or if you live in a place where other languages are spoken, that could have a huge impact on a child's ability to learn. And although children do learn quickly, and they learn a second language much faster than adults do, but that could still be a huge barrier for them. And thank goodness some of the interventions for that have been programs like ESL and things that are geared to help children in that predicament. Parents not reading with their children could be a huge risk cognitively for children, and that's been mentioned. Also, lack of music and arts exposure to those has been a problem for children cognitively. And then as far as social and emotional, my sister talked about her 4-year-old and how he's often seen as a tag-along, and he's compared to his brothers a lot. And that socially and emotionally could hinder him in having a healthy self-esteem and self-awareness and individuality, because he's often lumped together with them and just seen as a tag-along. So those are some of the risks that my interviewees came up with, and I thought that they were pretty interesting.
Thank you, everyone. The findings that you guys come up with from your research this week and the interviews that you conducted 2 weeks ago were all very interesting and helpful. So, we will now collaboratively identify common elements of effective intervention targeted to different problems in different domains. We will also share our best general insights about effectively intervening to foster optimum development, and then we'll wrap up by helping Connie summarize the highlights from our conversation today.
I have an insight that I wanted to share as I was listening to everybody. It seemed that there were just a few, but I'll just touch on one. Common element seemed to be communication. Communication with your child, communication with your child's teachers, communications from the teachers to the parents, communications with professionals, or the professionals to the parents, or the teachers to the professionals. In all aspects, it seems like communication is huge. And that was just one common element I noticed when people were mentioning interventions.
Yeah, I noticed that too. I think that that's one of the things that parents don't realize is that they have a lot of power in just communicating. So, if you see a risk or something, not to be afraid to speak up. One other thing that I noticed that was similar, mostly between Laura's, Natalie's, and my topics for the week, was that parents question whether intervening is good. I noticed that in Laura's experience with bullying, at first she didn't know how to intervene, she didn't know what she should do. And then the same with the negative friendships. Parents wonder if intervening is a good idea. Same with overprotective parents. They maybe think that they should intervene all the time. So, what do you guys think about that? How can parents know when to intervene and when to not intervene?
Well, I just think that if you feel uncomfortable, the chances are your child feels uncomfortable. And one thing that I read, and I'm trying to think where I read it from, but I can't think right now, was that kids between the ages of like 2 and 11, I know Jillian said this, but they want to know. They want to know what's going on. So you can sit down with them and, you can say, and communicate, go back to that, and just be like, when so-and-so was over, I felt a little uncomfortable when this happened. What did you feel like? Because I want to make sure that maybe I just read it wrong, and then you're giving them the opportunity to communicate with you, but then you're giving them the choice to say, not to just be like, yeah, he's a bad friend, or no, you're just reading into it wrong. You are giving him or her the opportunity to say, yeah, I felt a little uncomfortable. Why do you think that happened? And so I think communications, but giving the facts. If you feel uncomfortable, most likely they're going to feel uncomfortable. So just be open to communicating about that, because you might have to have a conversation that you're not even ready to have with your child, but you need to be ready.
Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Jillian.
Okay, I think too, along the communication thing, somebody mentioned to give them 2 choices, and I think that's so true. Like, for instance, I'll give my daughter 2 choices that I want her to do, not, well, if you want to watch TV or do you want to help clean your room? Obviously she's going to pick clean, watch TV. Obviously she's going to pick to watch TV, but pick 2 choices that you want them to do. Like, you're going to clean your room or you're going to help pick up the toys in this room. 2 things that you're okay with. And the 2, in communication, you're the parent, you're the authority, and you can help to teach your child, this is what we're doing, or this is what we're doing, we're going to do it now, I'm going to do it before we do this, or whatever. So,
Connie, to answer your question, I think another way to also determine whether or not you should intervene is to make sure that you're observant and involved with your children. I think sometimes parents jump into situations before they're really fully aware. So I really loved Laura's example of when her son was being bullied. She invited that dialogue for a while, and then it finally came. She made sure to get all of the facts, and then she acted. Then she went to the school. I think sometimes it's hard for parents to be so meticulous, but it paid off wonderfully in the end. Her son got the help that he needed, and the situation was handled wonderfully, and her son felt like he had control. He wasn't just domineered by his mom.
Yeah, that was a great example.
Yeah, it was awesome. I really loved that. Awesome, Laura. But
well, and thank you. I think part of that whole situation, you know, because I've had my kids, my older two are only 11 months, no, sorry, 13 months. They feel like 11 months apart. And so they're both in middle school, and I had talked with both of them because I know bullying can be a real issue. And so I would just regularly check in, how are things going? Or my daughter, she would come and say, oh, this kid said this to me and it really hurt my feelings. But I didn't at the time feel like, you know, it was kind of like okay, so what can you do to deal with that? With my son, there was this inner feeling. I really feel like the Spirit was telling me that I needed to work a little closer with him, that something was wrong. And I think that's a big indicator when a parent needs to intervene, is when the Spirit's working with you and you know that something's off and something's not right. And like, I was seriously praying. I was like, Heavenly Father, help me to know how to ask these questions, because something isn't right here, but he's not talking to me. And I was asking questions in ways that I had never thought of, and they were just coming. And so in that moment, I think if you are prayerful about what your kids need, especially if you feel something's off, the Lord will give you the direction and that insight that you need to help them. That, at least that was my experience, and I was really grateful for it.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to add something that Connie had said. I believe it was Connie's. Tell me if I'm wrong, but that they need to feel comfortable with the action that the parent is taking. I'm sure Laura was upset and everything, but she just wasn't. She didn't want to create more problems for her son, and so that goes back to the communication. Like, she went in, she did everything that she needed to do, but he's the one who had the list written out, you know, and so I'm sure that it helped a lot that he was comfortable with what she was doing.
And I forgot to mention, I did say, I didn't know if I used the words, are you comfortable? But I said, okay, I kind of outlined, this is what may happen, and are you okay with that? Are you okay giving them a list? Are you, you know, because I don't want my kids to feel like I'm plowing through and they're, you know, because it does have real consequences. I didn't want that bully to come back and then threaten him even more. I can't believe you told, da-da-da-da. So I was trying to prevent that, but
well, and
it's hard. It's a fine line.
Yeah, it all goes back to that communication, you know, without that communication. And then I like how you brought up following the Spirit, because, you know, we've been given that gift. And I think that too often parents, each of us, want to go in with guns blazing, and we want to, you know, let our emotions rule everything. But Laura handled that very well, because she, you know, prayed about it and thought about it, and, you know, didn't let her emotions rule what she was going to do. And I think that was handled really well. You communicated with your son. You didn't pull the rug out from under him. You didn't cut him off at the knees. You let him still feel like he was in control and had some power over his life, but you were there to support him. You know, when parents go in and do everything for the child, then the child is left feeling powerless and, you know, like they didn't have any control over the situation. So that was just handled so well.
Well, thank you. There have been plenty of times where it hasn't been, so I was grateful for the Lord's help on that. Really quick, if somebody, I don't know if anyone has another common element, I also noticed that there was a lot of talk about the influence of teachers in interventions for both the mental illness and for neglect, and again, good communication with the parent and seeking external resources on the part of teachers was mentioned. So my top two, if I had to pick, would be communication and influence of teachers, and obviously the influence of parents, but teachers seem to be a big factor in this discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it had to do with almost everything we talked about: bullying, neglect, you know, that teachers could see a lot of the signs, you know, what else? Negative friendships, even teachers can you know, have an influence there. So yeah, I feel like that's another good choice.
With that, we shared a video in our PowerPoint about how a teacher in Seattle, I think, and it just got on the news just recently, how he starts his class every day with their students coming up and saying, "You are wonderful. You make me laugh. You're so smart," or whatever. I mean, just imagine how great that is for those children to hear those words coming from someone they look up to every day. I mean, that's amazing.
I saw that video. Yeah, it's like positive affirmations for like
Right.
5 minutes for each child. I think that's so awesome.
Some teachers, that's like someone that they look up to. It's kind of like their second mom or dad. You know, if they don't feel comfortable going to their parents, maybe they'll go to a teacher. You know, like it's important to have that rapport with your teacher and students.
I think, yeah, that's so true. And kind of similar to that, I think another common element is just peers as well. They can contribute to risks, and they can also contribute to interventions. So we've talked a lot about how bad friendships can lead to social and emotional deterioration, and how peers can be bullies, but I think that peers can also be a saving grace. You know, for every bully, there can be a friend that helps stick up for your kid. For every negative friendship, there can be a positive one that ends up helping to find who your child is in the end, and helping them develop well in all of those different domains. So from what we talked about it in more of a risk way, but I do think that there is a lot of power to peers, and I think that's a common element as well.
For sure.
One thing I read in my research with the negative friendships, with all the advice of like knowing who your children's friends are, they said kind of what Jordan just said, but you never know if there's that one little seed in their group that is just brave enough to say something. And so if you know who their friends are, they might feel comfortable coming to you and being like, can I talk to you about something? Or I saw this happen, or I saw this happen. And so although your child might not want to stick up to that bad influence, someone else might. And so knowing your kids' friends, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, one of the things Laura mentioned when she was talking about bullying was checking in with your child often. And I think that goes with all of the other things we've been talking about. You know, it's communication, but it's constant communication, you know. And, you know, with friends, making sure you know who they are and what influence they're having over your kids. And so, I don't know, I think that it's more than just having a talk every once in a while, but it's just having casual conversations with your kids all the time, just building that open door policy so that they feel comfortable talking
Or
to you.
even for like the dads, taking your kid aside, having a PPI with them. You know, just
Totally.
It doesn't have to be like a boy necessarily, like a priesthood interview thing, but just taking them aside, just talking to them one-on-one in a room, you know, like once a month, just to have that, you know, what's going on in your life, are you okay, kind of thing.
Right.
I thought it was interesting how we both had the same topic kind of per se for the weeks 10 and 11, the PowerPoint presentations we had to do. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we did do very similar topics.
Yeah. It's why our group is such a great group. We just think alike.
We all think on the same page.
Seriously. All right, well, I think that we've talked about a lot of the common elements. And I think that we've honestly covered the general insights about effectively intervening as well. We can talk about that more, though, but I think
we have about 2 more minutes to reach the 15-minute mark. So if we just want to share some more common elements.
I have a best general insight or suggestion. I thought, you know, you look at all those common elements, and what good are any of those if you're not aware, and Connie just touched on this, if you're not aware of what's going on with your kids. So I think it's really important that parents are aware, or teachers, because sometimes parents are not in tune with their kids, as we've discussed, but they be aware of the developmental delays in all 3 domains. and take appropriate steps to intervene, collaborate, use community resources, get school supports in place. And then I really liked, again, Connie, how you talked about communicate and check in with your child regularly, so that then you'll know how to best help them, and you'll be able to help them feel empowered as you keep those lines of communication open. But if you're not aware, none of that's going to do any good.
Yeah, it's basically the bottom line. You know, you can't be an advocate for your child if you don't even know what's going on in their lives. So, yeah, I completely agree with that.
So I work in a school, and something that I see, I work with kids in the kindergarten classrooms that are delayed developmentally and academically. And a lot of these kids are troublemakers. I'm not putting them in a group. I'm just saying that in this classroom that I work in. And so when, you know, they get like a red note slip taken home or whatever, these parents come in and they're like enraged. And it's like, so you're upset about the fact that your child got on red today, but he doesn't know any of his words, his sight words. He never turns in homework. He never does anything. So it's like when they feel like their child is being singled out by somebody else, it's like that's when they want to intervene. It's like it's too late, because then they just see their parents upset and they don't know what's going on, and then they see these parents like blow up and they're like, oh, so that's acceptable because my parents do that. So it's okay for me to yell at my teacher or to yell at my friends and to speak my mind. And so I just think that it's like, because we've talked so much about neglect and just these kids that, you know, have these parents that just kind of want to write them off. And then it's when it's convenient for them to have 2 minutes for their kids, it's like that's when they want to be angry at everybody else.
Right, and then the intervention isn't effective. It's an ineffective intervention.
Correct. You know, it's like these kids, it's like, we're like, okay, well, you're going to go on red, and so that means, you know, I have to tell your parents. And, you know, some of these kids freak out, and they're like, don't tell my mom, please don't tell my mom. And you automatically think, okay, what happens at home when you go home and you have a red card? And you try not to think of the worst, because you're like, well, I have kids that I work with that have like papers from the first day of school in their folder. Nothing, you know, it's like nothing. But those parents are always the first ones to come in, and you know, why are you singling out my child? Why was he on red? Why was he? And I'm like, I shouldn't say this, but it's like, why do you care now? Like, if you were to have communicated with your child, if you would have not neglected your child, we would not be at this place.
It goes back to being an advocate for your child. Those parents aren't being an advocate for their children. They're, you know, they think they are because they're fighting some battle, you know, but it's too late. They haven't been there to support their child or to help their child succeed or to empower them. Instead, they've let them do everything on their own, and then when they fail, then they get up in arms about it. It's like, I felt like everything we talked about really went along with the readings this week, especially the Chapter 3 parenting styles, where we talked about Gottman and his 4 parenting styles, and then the other one, what was it, Diana Baumrind, her 4 parenting styles. I felt like a lot of those, you know, those parenting styles have to do with what we're talking about, whether it's a neglectful parent or an authoritative parent, you know, how they enable their child, or how they, you know, pretty much take away the power from their child. It's really got a lot to do with it.
Yeah, it's so true. I love how you guys did,
but we need to wrap up.
Jordan, were you going to say one thing?
I was just going to say, yeah, those are wonderful insights. And if we want, we could help you, Connie, summarize highlights from our conversation, because the instructions said to do that as part of the recording. So.
Okay, sure. So just to summarize, we're supposed to talk about our the highlights and what we learned and the conclusions we drew. So I think what the highlights were the common elements that we discussed were mostly communication. I think that's pretty much the overarching theme of this discussion is communication between parents and children, between children and teachers, between parents and teachers, and professionals, doctors, whoever's involved. Pretty much that without a good open relationship with the child, the parent can't be a good advocate for them, and communication is key, and constant communication, not just a one-time conversation about something that happens, but to constantly be checking in. And I like what Jillian said about telling your child up front what you're going to do. If you're going to be an advocate for them, you need to make sure that you are acting in behalf of your child and not in behalf of yourself. And then, like Laura suggested, I liked that we focused on teacher relationships and the influence that teachers have over children, because they're basically, probably the second biggest advocate for children, and that parents and teachers need to work together instead of against each other in behalf of the child, and finding risks and interventions that will work for the child. And then above all, I think as parents, we need to follow the spirit in knowing when to intervene for our children and how to intervene.
That's so true. I would only add from the last part of our conversation, just being a consistent parent and not just being involved selectively at our own convenience when there are consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. Okay. I think we're done, right?
All right, I'm going to end it. Does anybody else have anything else?
No.
Nope.